Business Development at NIC Securities.
Well, French-speaking African countries consist of countries informally grouped together. Despite diversity, these countries have all experienced significant levels of growth over the past decade. Now, despite growth and progress, significant work is still required to enable these economies to build a robust and competitive private sector. Let's unpack what's driving Francophone Africa and talking to us about the business between Francophone and Anglophone Africa, Edward George, Head of Soft Commodities Research at EcoBank. Thanks for joining us today, Edward. So looking at the numbers when it comes to World Bank projections, you're looking at around 750 million people that are projected to live in the Francophone African region by around 2050. And this consists of around 25 countries. But at this point in time, we're looking at low investment interest in this part of Africa. What do you think is driving that mentality?
Well, I think basically we're seeing that it is one of the most important trade blocs in Africa. The CFA franc zone has been around since the 1940s, and there's a lot of advantages for all the countries in that region. They have a common currency which is linked to the euro, so that takes away a lot of the exchange rate risk. They also have a common legal framework which oversits the region, governed by OHADA, and of course they have the language links and the links of the different francophone companies who operate all across the region. The problem has been with the zone that it is not very well integrated with other parts of Africa, particularly West Africa, Anglophone. If we look at the amount of trade, for example, between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, it was just $29 million of exports from Ghana last year, about 1% of its total exports. So I think this really reflects the fact that as a zone it's quite successful and integrated, but there really needs to be a lot more to increase trade with its neighbours and of course the rest of the world.
I mean, what do you think is driving the lack of business and the lack of trade between Francophone African countries and those that are surrounding them right now?
Well, part of it is to do with the fact that a lot of the countries in West Africa are very closely focused on exporting commodities. So they're really focused on the international market. They're not so interested in doing trade with each other. Also, the transport links between the different countries are not very good. It's often cheaper to fly from Nigeria to the UK than it is directly to Cote d'Ivoire, if you even can. And this means that basically they very often, these countries, even if they're bordering with each other, look in opposite directions. But there is a real change underway at the moment. I think we're really seeing with Nigerian companies emerging aggressively onto the West African market and into Francophone West Africa. We have Nigeria about to start producing very large surpluses of consumer goods and food, and I think we're going to see more of that trade in the region and more Nigerian investment in Francophone countries.
I mean, to what extent do we also need to acknowledge the difference in terms of the approach to business and how business is conducted in a Francophone country relative to an Anglophone country, and perhaps taking lead from the colonial era?
Well, I think the thing to bear in mind is that there is a different kind of mentality between the Francophone and Anglophone parts of Africa. A lot of that reflects the fact that the legal systems, the government, the education system was originally installed by the colonial authorities. But also it kind of goes beyond that. There is in Francophone countries in general, there is a more top-down approach, which is in fact preferred by a lot of the businesses and the elite, whereas you find in Anglophone countries there tends to be more ability for entrepreneurs to emerge. These are different approaches to the same problem. They both have their successes and their failures, but I think very often this can lead to confusion and misunderstanding between different businesses. If you have an Anglophone business going into Francophone Africa or vice versa, they can misinterpret not just the language itself, but very often what people are really saying and what the real incentives are to make business work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you bring up an important concept there, and that of course is whether English will become the language of business more and more in these parts of the world, and whether it is being instilled from a government perspective in terms of the education system. I mean, what are your thoughts on the outlook for that, and whether that will ultimately help ease doing business between Francophone Africa and the rest of Africa?
Well, I think there's no doubt that English is the international business language, and definitely in large parts of Francophone Africa at high-level meetings, very often business is conducted in English, even if a lot of the documentation is in French. We've already seen that Rwanda has now decided to adopt as its official language English. Gabon is planning to make English as a second official language, and you have some countries which straddle the two languages, such as Cameroon. The north of the country is Anglophone. So definitely English could be a useful conduit for the Francophone countries to start doing business with their Anglophone neighbours, but it has to be both ways. If you are an Anglophone business and you want to do business in Francophone Africa, you intend to build a business relationship there, spend years in the market, you have to learn the language. It simply doesn't make any sense. Otherwise, you will always basically be sitting in the room outside when all the real deals are going on inside and you don't understand what they're saying.
Exactly. I mean, certainly just looking at investment banks here in South Africa, you've got the upper hand if you've got French on your CV and you're able to be part of a team that does business in Francophone Africa. But what are your thoughts in terms of the investment growth hotspots that we're seeing in this part of the world? I mean, what would you highlight right now as countries that stand out of the 25 countries in the region?
Well, without a doubt, the most interesting for me is Côte d'Ivoire. The country has had almost 10 years of political instability. There was also quite a violent civil conflict only a couple of years ago. But the country is really re-emerging to become the economic powerhouse of West Africa. The only real competitor you could consider to Côte d'Ivoire is Nigeria, which of course is the largest economy in the region. And the thing is that Côte d'Ivoire already does around 40% of its trade with its neighbours. It's the most developed trade hub in the region. It is not only just trading products all along the coast, but of course into the interior, into the Sahel, particularly Burkina Faso, Mali. So I think that's a very interesting hotspot. I think also its closest competitor, Senegal, with the port of Dakar. Dakar competes with Abidjan to be the main port of entry for all goods going into and out of West Africa. I think that has great potential in terms of economic investment. And then also, I mean, if you look at the tiny trade entrepôts of Togo and Benin, so many of the goods that flow through there flow into Ghana and Nigeria, a lot of them actually informally. And there's a huge move to formalize the industries here and to improve the logistics. I think for many years to come, they're going to be important conduits of goods into these two huge economies. There's a lot of opportunities there for investors who are prepared to take on Togo and Benin.
From a government perspective right now, if you had to look on the whole at these countries, do government leaders and the regulators right now acknowledge the fact that the lack of integration with Anglophone Africa, with Lusophone Africa, is holding back these countries? I mean, is there a drive right now to open up more and more the opportunities for businesses to collaborate and work together?
Well, I think it's always been an aspiration of the governments of Francophone and Anglophone Africa to come closer together. They do all sit as part of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and there's already a large degree of cooperation between them. But I think the reality is that the CFA Franc Zone has been very focused on integrating itself, just as the West Africa Monetary Zone has, which is the Anglophone component. And so ultimately, I think until further consolidation has happened on those fronts, I think any talk of really a tighter knitting of Anglophone and Francophone Africa is something for the future. What's really going to drive it is businessmen and investors. When those flows start going, the governments will follow them.